Imagine for a moment that you're a teacher. You're responsible for a wide variety of students in your classroom. They have different understandings, abilities, and engagement levels. You're working on a test for all of them. This test is going to quiz them on multiple things, different tasks, different knowledge levels. Now, what if I told you I could make that test seem easier for about 18 in your class of 20 in a few seconds with a couple clicks? This is the world that opens to education when graphic design is welcomed into the classroom. I was first welcomed into the classroom as a co-teacher during summer school in my graduate school experience. Co-teaching is when two teachers split the responsibilities of teaching, the planning, the instruction, the serving of students. As my cohort and I anxiously awaited the names of our co-teachers, we understood that they could make the difficult task of teaching easier, or they could make it harder and more unpleasant. Graphic design is a co-teacher in our classrooms. Finding out that Comic Sans was my co-teacher might have put a thrill of terror into my young teaching heart. But much like an experienced teacher who just happens to love those denim vests with the pumpkins on them, Comic Sans has a lot to teach the world of graphic design about education. Let's take a look at why Comic Sans makes sense in the classroom. For our students that are learning to read, the first steps is understanding the letter forms, then looking at the words, all before making sense of the text. If we look at an example of a second grader's handwriting, Comic Sans, Helvetica New, and Times New Roman, we can see that Comic Sans has a clear place. Which font would look the most familiar, the most accessible to a second grade student? Graphic designers who turn up their noses at those Comic Sans using teachers and their pumpkin vests are missing the point. The point is that educators can make smart instinctual design moves to help their students learn. And if we can help them extend that knowledge, we can continue to make graphic design a great co-teacher in the classroom. One way to do this is with the use of text hierarchy. Text hierarchy is the idea of organizing text so that some parts are clearer than others. In other words, answering the question, what does the reader see first? There are lots of ways to do this. With size, with space and layout, which you will see in a moment, and with the use of bold or italics. All these ways are ways to change what students see first, and teachers can use them strategically to support learning in the classroom. They can nudge students towards what's most important. For example, on a test, we can highlight important elements of the questions or the prompts. If teachers can consider these graphic designs ideas of text hierarchy and whether the text is accessible, they can work towards big goals of type design, legibility and usability. Legibility is how easy it is to read a font, how clearly it can be understood, and can depend on a lot of things. The size of the text on the page, the amount of text on the page, even things like how much toner the copier has in it. Usability is whether the reader can make use of the text. Can they answer our questions as we ask them? If teachers think about these things, they can make graphic design a powerful force for good in education. How powerful? Think back to when I had you imagine being a teacher. I said I could make a test seem easier to 18 in a class of 20. In communication arts, a study was published wherein participants, 303 of them, looked at two sets of directions for building a wardrobe. These directions were absolutely identical in length, content, word choice, except for one thing. One set was in a serif font, and one set was in a sans serif font. 90.7% of participants perceived those sans serif instructions to make the wardrobe easier to build with just a type change. Bring that back to your classroom. That's 9 out of your 10 students getting a pat on the back from your graphic design co-teacher as they take this difficult test. As we zoom back from the graphic design in front of us and look at the graphic design around us, we need to think about the classrooms our students are learning in. Are they like Times Square, Or are they like a highway? Picture yourself in Times Square. There's the hustle and bustle, bright lights, lots of colors, advertisements for things you like, dislike, maybe things you've never even heard of. So what makes Times Square, or a classroom like Times Square? A first warning sign is a sense of being overwhelmed upon entering. That awe and hustle and bustle that makes Times Square such a great tourist place is not a productive awe in our classrooms. As a teacher, I know it can be tempting to cover every square inch available with information for our students. State capitals, how to spell words, how to cooperate. But unless we're intentional with our choices, we can make our spaces at best a place where bored students can look around a lot, and at worst, a waste of valuable space. A visually overwhelming classroom can be very distracting for students with attention difficulties or with sensory sensitivities. And even if there is something valuable on the wall, having them covered can make it harder to find what's useful. William Morris said, "Have nothing in your houses that you do not believe to be beautiful or know to be useful." Teachers can apply the same thing to our classroom. Do I have things in my classroom that are just beautiful? Yes, there are decorations by my desk, and I don't count on them to educate my students. But teachers must be careful to think intentionally about what we're putting on our walls and not letting these decorations take over our classrooms. So if that's Times Square, what makes a classroom like a highway? The signage and systems of a highway are much different. Ideally, they support a traveler in their independent trip down the highway. They shouldn't be so distracting to endanger that trip. In the classroom, this looks like signage that supports students in their independent education. I have an example of what I consider some good signage in my school. My school has a lot of long hallways, and they can be very confusing to navigate, even for an adult, and especially for a kindergartner. And the signage, when you'll see it, there you go, you'll see that it's very clearly marked what needs to happen. This is at the end of a hallway at a T, where, you can probably guess, the kids need to go this way. What I like about this is how clear it is, even for our non-readers. They can see what needs to happen. As discussed earlier, this font and these letter forms should be familiar to the student, as it's their own handwriting. And that's my favorite part. It provides ownership for the students. If we invite students into the process of making signage and posters for our school, we let them feel that ownership, and they often have great ideas for how to make them usable. The last thing that's great about highway design is as you drive past signs that aren't relevant anymore, they disappear. They fade into the background. Most teachers wish they had more room to hang things up in their classrooms, me included. And even as I worked on this talk, I realized there were some posters that I could retire and take down. The students weren't referencing them. I wasn't referencing them. They already knew the procedures or skills listed. If I took those down, I would have space for a new poster, maybe one with great legibility and great text hierarchy. If the field of education can consider graphic design intentionally, and if the field of graphic design seeks to inform education, I see a future of more helpful graphic design co-teachers and well-marked highways of classrooms. Thank you.